Chapter 3. A New Life in England. The ship from New York to England took 11 days, and the young Lord Fauntleroy made a lot of friends in that time. Everybody liked him, and everybody was interested in the story of his family. Cedric learned a new piece of the story on the ship.
"We're going to have different homes," said he.
His mother told him.
"You must live in the castle with your grandfather, and I have a little house called Court Lodge, not far away. You can run in and see me every day."
Cedric could not understand this, and was very unhappy about it.
"But why?"
he asked again and again.
"When you are older,"
his mother said sadly,
"I can tell you, but not now."
To Mr. Havisham, she said this.
"The Earl hates me and does not want to see me. I don't want Cedric to know that, because how could he understand it? He is a loving child, and I want him and his grandfather to be friends. It is better for the Earl that way." "I don't like it,"
Cedric said later to Mr. Havisham.
"But Dearest tells me I must live with my grandfather because, you see, all his children are dead. You must be sorry for a man when all his children are dead."
Mr. Havisham smiled. He enjoyed his little talks with Cedric very much. "Are you going to like the Earl?" he asked.
"Yes,"
said Lord Fauntleroy.
"Of course, a boy must like his grandfather, and he's very kind to me."
On his first night in England, Cedric stayed with his mother in her little house near the castle. But Mr. Havisham went up to the castle to see the Earl. The Earl was in a big chair by the fire. He had a bad right foot, and it gave him a lot of pain. And when his foot was painful, the Earl was even more bad-tempered than usual. "Well, Havisham," he said, "what's the news?" Mr. Havisham began to tell him about the ship. But the Earl did not want to hear about that. "Yes, yes, yes," he said angrily. "But what about the boy? What kind of a boy is he? Is he stupid? What does he look like? Does he talk all the time in that stupid, noisy American way?" Mr. Havisham smiled his little lawyer's smile. "He is different from most English children, I think. But one thing, my lord. The boy knows nothing about your feelings about his mother. She said nothing to him because she wants you and him to be friends. So he thinks you are the kindest grandfather in the world." "He does, eh?" said the Earl. "So, when you speak of his mother, please be careful." "Huh!" said the Earl. "The boy's only 7 years old." "Those 7 years were all at his mother's side," said Mr. Havisham, "and she has all his love." The next afternoon, the Earl's carriage carried Lord Fauntleroy and Mr. Havisham up to Dorincourt Castle. At the great front door, all the servants of the house waited to see the new Lord Fauntleroy, the little boy from America. When Cedric got out of the carriage, everybody had something to say about him. "Oh, look! He's just like his father, with the same hair, the same eyes. The dear little boy. And he's got his father's happy smile too. Look!" "I'm sorry for him, living with that bad-tempered old man. Nobody ever gets a kind word out of the Earl. And his poor young mother, living all alone at Court Lodge, without her little boy. I'm sorry for her too." Cedric smiled and said hello to everybody in his usual friendly way, and went into the house with Mr. Havisham. One of the servants, a tall young man, took Cedric to the back of the house and opened a door. "Lord Fauntleroy, my lord," he said. Cedric walked down a long room to a fire at the end. There was a big chair there, and an old man in it, with white hair and black eyes. Cedric came close to the chair. "Are you the Earl?" he said. "I'm your grandson. Mr. Havisham brought me." He held out his hand. "I'm very happy to see you." The Earl shook hands with him, very surprised. He stared at the strong, beautiful little boy in front of him, with his golden curly hair and his friendly, open face. "Happy to see me, are you?" he said. "Yes," said Lord Fauntleroy. "Of course. Everybody loves their family, don't they? It's exciting to meet a new grandfather, and you are very kind." He sat down on a chair and looked at his grandfather with great interest. The old Earl looked back at him. He did not like anybody in his family. He was bad-tempered with them all, and they all hated him. "Kind?" he said. "How am I kind?" "Because of the money," Cedric said happily, "for Bridget and Dick. I wanted to thank you." "Bridget? Dick? Who are they?" said the Earl. And so Lord Fauntleroy told his grandfather all about his friends in New York, about Bridget and her husband and her 12 children, about Dick and Jake and the boot-black business. The Earl of Dorincourt did not like children, and children were usually afraid of him. But Cedric was not afraid, and he talked in his usual friendly way. "He thinks I'm his friend," thought the Earl, "and he wants to please me." This was a new feeling for the Earl. Cedric was only a little boy from America, but perhaps it was nice for the Earl to see a smiling face for once. They talked all evening, through dinner and after dinner. In the end, Cedric went to sleep in front of the fire. The Earl called a servant. "Carry Lord Fauntleroy up to his bedroom," he said. "Be careful with him. The boy's tired." Chapter 4. The Earl and his Grandson. The next morning, there were more surprises for Cedric. He had a servant, Mary, and 3 rooms in the castle. A room to sleep in, a room to have breakfast in, and a room full of books and toys and games. Wonderful games. Later, when he went down to the Earl in the long room, he took one of the games with him.
"Thank you very much for all the wonderful things. You're so kind,"
Cedric said happily.
"This game is really good. Would you like to play it with me?"
The Earl was in a bad temper, and his foot was painful. He did not give money and toys to his grandson because he had a kind heart. He gave these things because he wanted the boy to forget his mother. He opened his mouth to say, "No, I don't play children's games," but he did not say it. He said, "Very well, you can teach me." When the tall young servant came in with a visitor, Mr. Dawson, the vicar, they heard excited cries and laughing.
"That's 2 out. Bad luck, grandfather."
Mr. Dawson usually hated his visits to the old Earl, but today was different and surprising. "Good morning, Dawson," the Earl said. "My grandson is keeping me busy." He put his hand on Cedric's head and nearly smiled. "What is it today, Dawson?"
"It's Higgins of Edge Farm, my lord,"
said Mr. Dawson.
"He can't pay his rent. He needs more time."
Every house in the village and every farm for miles around Dorincourt all belonged to the Earl. The villagers and the farmers paid their rent to the Earl's man, Mr. Newick. And Mr. Newick was a hard man. Mr. Dawson came to the Earl many times a year with the same question,
Can this family or that family have more time to pay their rent?
And the answer was always, no. Higgins, said the Earl, he's a bad farmer, and he's always late with his rent, Newick tells me.
His wife is ill, and 2 of his children,
Mr. Dawson said,
and Newick wants to put them all out of the house into the street. Higgins came to me yesterday to ask for help. Another month, he says, and he can find the rent.
Huh! They all say that, said the Earl, looking angry.
Lord Fauntleroy listened to every word of this.
He began to feel a great interest in Higgins and his family.
It was the same for Bridget and her family, he said.
The Earl jumped a little. I forgot you, he said. I forgot we had a philanthropist in the room. He stared at the boy for a minute. Come here, he said. Cedric went and stood next to him. What shall we do about Higgins, then? Said the Earl. Tell me. Mr. Dawson began to feel worried. How could a 7-year-old child answer a question like that? Lord Fauntleroy put his hand on his grandfather's arm.
Well, I'm just a little boy, so what can I do? But you can do anything, he said. Who's Newick?
He works for me, said the Earl, and some of my villagers don't like him very much.
Are you going to write to him now? Cedric asked. Shall I bring you a pen and some paper?
In Cedric's world, there was only one answer to the question about Higgins. Of course, he must have more time. Of course, Newick must leave the family alone. The Earl looked at him. Can you write? He asked.
Yes,
said Cedric,
but not very well.
Bring the pen and paper, and you write the letter. Lord Fauntleroy's face went red.
But my spelling isn't very good, he said.
The Earl smiled a little. Higgins isn't interested in your spelling. I'm not the philanthropist. You are. And so Cedric wrote a letter to Mr. Newick. It was true. The spelling was not very good.
Dear Mr. Newick, please leave Mr. Higgins alone for now. He can pay when he is ready. Yours, Fauntleroy.
Mr. Dawson went away and took the letter for Mr. Newick with him. He took a happy heart with him too. There were changes at Dorincourt Castle. After Mr. Dawson's visit, Cedric looked at the clock.
Can I go to Dearest now?
He said to his grandfather.
She's waiting for me.
There is something for you to see first, said the Earl.
Thank you,
said Fauntleroy, his face red again.
But I think I must see it tomorrow. Dearest is waiting."
"Very well," said the Earl. Then he said, "It's a pony."
"A pony?"
cried Fauntleroy.
"Is it a pony for me? Like the things in my room upstairs?"
"Yes," said his grandfather. "Would you like to see it?"
"A pony!"
Fauntleroy said again. He was very excited.
"How kind you are! You give me everything. I want to see it very much, but there isn't time now."
"Perhaps you can go to see your mother another time," said the Earl. "Tomorrow, or the day after."
"Oh, no," said the boy. "She thinks about me all the time, and I think about her too. I must go now."
They went down to Court Lodge in the Earl's carriage. Cedric talked all the time, very happily.
"You're a very kind man, Grandfather. You're always doing good things and thinking about other people."
He counted on his fingers.
"Do you know, 27 people are happy because of you? 27!
The Earl said nothing. He thought about his life, a rich, selfish, bad-tempered life, without friends or loving family. "When did I say a kind word, or do a good thing? Now this child is calling me kind and good, and I know that is not true." These were new thoughts for the Earl, and he did not like them. When they arrived at Court Lodge, Cedric was out of the carriage in a second, running to the front door. The Earl watched from the carriage. The door opened, and a young, pretty woman in black ran out. Cedric jumped into her arms, smiling and laughing. The Earl closed the window, and his carriage drove away.